younger workers are raking in the biggest wage gains in the tight labor market. And if you've been following our videos for any length of time, or really since the start of the pandemic, you'll have heard us posit as to the reasons why the labor shortage is persisting. And what we've tried to do is identify kind of 5 different cohorts, of course, that are contributing to what is a labor shortage that really doesn't look like it's going to go away because of the kinds of workers that have left. And we've talked about, of course, the early retirees who have pulled forward their retirement as a function of the stock market or the returns being so great over the last decade or so. We've talked about individuals who've gotten sick and have had to leave the workforce, caretakers of individuals who've gone sick and have had to leave the workforce. But an interesting cohort that we talked about as well is younger workers, those between probably 16 and 24 or so, who are taking longer to get into the workforce. And whether this is because of shifting sentiment around work, safety at work, for example, being one, whether we're seeing a kind of a psychology around doing things that you're passionate about and people struggling to find work that aligns with that. I mean, there are many different reasons why younger workers are taking longer to get into the workforce, but that net effect is that the labor shortage persists because companies aren't able to tap into that pool of talent that is quite substantial when you look at things. So when you look across those 5 cohorts, of course, that we talked about earlier in other videos, it does seem like if the workforce as a whole wanted to shrink the labor shortage, the fastest or the most pragmatic place to go is probably younger workers, to figure out a way to get them into the workforce quicker, to incentivize work better. And what we're seeing, I think, is that at an aggregate level here. And the median hourly wage for workers between the ages of 16 and 24 were 10.6% higher in January this year than they were last year, January. And compare that, of course, to an aggregate across all workers, there was a 4% gain in wage. So quite substantial there. I think a caveat, of course, is that we're looking at younger workers typically fill roles that have a lower base. Something like 48 or half of all workers who work at the minimum wage, $7.25 federally, are younger workers between the ages of 16 and 24. So any movement up from that low base typically shows up a little bit higher in terms of percentage difference. But it's still something to take note of, because on an aggregate basis, that's still a lot of money. And there are a few different things at play here, I think. I think one, is maybe we'll start with the first being that companies are looking to bring younger workers back into the workforce, and as a function of that, are having to pay higher wages or choosing to pay higher wages to bring them back. That's a little bit of a no-brainer, and I think is one of the simple things to point to when we see a statistic like this. The second is that there are inflationary effects here, I think, and inflationary effects that rest on, maybe a bed of empathy, so to speak. So the CPI read is 7.5% up in this January than it was last January. So consumer prices are up 7.5%. If you listen to some of the videos that we've done, myself and James Phillip on his channel, we've talked a lot about how inflation shows up, or inflation hurts the individuals who really can't afford it to hurt. Individuals who, lower income individuals whose share or whose wallet share, so to speak, of things that they spend on food and staples is a higher percentage than the rest of the workforce. I think a 7.5% increase in prices really does affect them more, and as a result of that, I think you have this bed of empathy. Despite I'll speak all day about the virtues of capitalism. That 10.5% increase in wages for younger workers, 16 and 24, I think is an aggregate response from the workforce to say, all right, let's take care of our younger workers a little bit, and make sure that they're incentivized to stay. Again, you compare that to the 4% aggregate across all workers. You can read that as a 3% net loss for the rest of the workforce in terms of wealth against inflation, younger workers aren't seeing that as much as a share of, or as a read against wage growth. And so that there's a bit of empathy there, I think, on at a workforce level. So we're looking at, I guess the third reason too that I would point to in terms of looking at the 10.6% wage growth is a lot of the what would you call it? You'd call it kind of the noise, or a lot of the movement, the push around increasing minimum wage. I think I mentioned earlier the stat around nearly half of all workers that work at minimum wage are under the age of 25. Any movement in the minimum wage levels across the country, and you're going to see a jump in median hourly wage. And so between those three things, I think you're seeing the reasons why younger workers are seeing outsized wage gains in the labor market. But it's not surprising. And I think when you see a number like, median hourly wages for workers that are younger are up 10.5 or 10.6%, it's not I don't think you can point to it and say that there's kind of an inequality thing going on, or why are younger people getting bigger wage gains, or this is an ageism thing. I think there's just dynamics around the level of wages, the kind of work the younger people take on, the greater incentive around getting younger people back into the workforce because of the labor shortage that are at play. And so those are things, or important things to think about as you think about a number like that.